Good morning. Happy Tuesday to everybody out there in YouTube land. One Virginia dude here. Well, if you've been watching the news, it appears as though Donald Trump has taken over Washington, D.C. on his agenda. Okay. What's good about it? What's bad about it? Well, I'm going to try and be brief. Um, the District of Columbia is a federal district. So, contrary to what people want you to think, it's not a state. It doesn't deserve two senators, and it doesn't even deserve a member of Congress. It's a separate district. Um, uh, anyway, DC was given home rule about 50 years ago by the Congress, um, which they've bungled it badly. If you're from the area, they call it the District of Calamity. The only thing the DC government is really good at doing is assessing fines and collecting taxes. They make millions of dollars a year from bogus speeding tickets. How do I know that? Because I got one. About 10 years ago, I was doing some Uber driving and I was in heavy traffic. The speed limit was 25 and I was probably going 20 because, the traffic in DC is really bad. And I get a ticket in the mail saying I was going like 36. And I know exactly where it was because the location was on there and I just got a picture of my car. I called my attorney, and she basically said, "Well, it's a scam. They target people from Virginia. Just pay it." It was $100, civil violation, no points on my license, no insurance or anything like that. She said you can fight it. You can drive up there. You can take a day off work and pay to park and sit in traffic. Is it worth it to you? And it's like, no. She said, yeah, they know that. They make millions and millions of dollars a year off of it. Now, some of the tickets might be legitimate, but I wasn't even going the speed limit because of traffic congestion. But nevertheless, they're really good at collecting taxes and charging fees and things like that. The city government is pretty inept at doing most anything. Being a mayor of DC, it's almost like being the biggest turd in the cesspool, so to speak. Um, you don't. I guess they don't expect you to do a lot of good. It's just a matter of who can keep the place from running into the ground. But as far as Trump is concerned, I understand that crime is down a little bit right now, but it's still way high. Crime in DC is off the charts, and it's not just murders, but it's other things too: carjacking, auto theft, property crimes, shoplifting, um, you know, robberies, sexual assault, and whatnot are pretty high for a city of that size. But anyway, is putting the National Guard on the street, is federalizing the law enforcement really a good idea? Um, you know, take over the DC department. If you're president of the United States, you have so many items on your plate. You've got the things in Ukraine, you've got the Middle East, you've got trade deals, you've got China, you've got taxes, you've got this ever growing debt, the budget deficit. You're in charge of the military. You've got judicial appointments, treaty negotiations, tariffs. You've got all this other stuff on your plate. The optics of this don't look good either. Okay. So you're going to take the National Guard, which is essentially the Army. Every soldier, in National Guard, it says U.S. Army on it. Um, you're going to have the National Guard augmenting law enforcement. Okay. What exactly does that entail? You put soldiers on the street. Okay. I understand if there's riots going on and things like that, but DC is not really quite in that situation. And they do have an adequate police department. It's a huge police department, and they also have other police departments like the Bureau of Engraving has their own police. I believe the Smithsonian has their own police. There are so many overlapping jurisdictions up there. If you ever drive through DC, you'll see all these. You'll be like, "Oh, I didn't know they had a police department." There's probably the dog pound probably has their own police department up there. There's all these different agencies, the park police, the Capitol Police and whatnot. And you've got the MPDC, I think they call it, Metropolitan Police of Washington, D.C. The problem is you've got a court system that's kind of jacked up. You've got a jail that, from what I understand, that jail is like Civil War conditions in there. You've got a big problem with recidivist criminals. You've got a lot of juvenile crime. You've got a lot of things that are out of control. But suppose you have the Army, the National Guard, which has different rules of engagement than civilian law enforcement. What's going to happen when, some little thug gets pumped with a slug? What happens when a guardsman, a kid throws a rock at a guardsman or puts him in fear? He's going to lock and load, and then you're going to have a problem on your hands. One thing that people don't think about with Donald Trump, and I don't say this to hate on Donald Trump. I'm kind of, he does things that sometimes it's like, okay, he's doing a good thing, but then he implements it wrong. Other times he'll say something and you're like, what? But then he'll do something else and you're like, okay, yeah, he just prevented a war. Okay. But this isn't really necessarily about Donald Trump, but he's establishing a precedent, not president, precedent, Precedent, precedent. So he sends the National Guard in, and I understand the DC is a federal district, but you send in the National Guard, you're going to set a trend that, suppose in the future you have a left-wing Democrat president like AOC or I don't know, David Hogg or, a Gavin Newsom or somebody. Let's say you have a left-wing Democrat president and you have something happening in a red state and you have people protesting against a gun law. You've got some pro-Second Amendment people out there. Well, what would be wrong if you establish this framework for a governor, let's say the president feels as though the governor isn't doing anything to handle some civil unrest, even if it's not a violent protest, if it's just a lot of people, and he sends in the National Guard or even federal troops, and you end up with a skirmish and a lot of people get killed. That's a good way to start a civil war in this country. But when I hate to quote Bill Maher, okay? I really want to hate that guy, but I can't, because sometimes he's spot on. He said that when you take a pendulum and you pull it really, really hard and really, really far to one side, the left, and it swings back, it's going to go harder and farther to the other side. He said it never stops in the center. And I'm like, you know what, Bill Maher, you were right. When he said that, he was absolutely correct. I'm supposed to hate the guy, but I can't. Sometimes he's snarky and he can say things that are annoying, but he's a smart guy and sometimes he gets it. Every now and then you're like, oh, wow, man, he really gets it. Maybe it won't last, but when he's right, if somebody's right, I don't care if they're on my side of the aisle or not. If somebody says something that is spot on, I will have to give them credit for it. But anyway, these things always come with a caveat. You have to be very careful, because when you start doing things like this, it sets it up that the other party is going to be in power. And neither the Democrats nor the Republicans ever seem to really learn that. When you unsheath a political weapon, it seldom ever gets put back into the scabbard. In other words, if you empower the government to do something that you believe is infinitely good, it's also going to mean that the government can do things that are basically infinitely bad as well. Some of us out here are saying, well, let's not give the government that power in the first place. But we're in a small minority. A lot of people are like, well, if he's on our side, we'll do it. Well, that's why we elected Donald Trump, so he can do this. It's like, well, you still have the Constitution in the way. And Donald Trump will say something like, well, sometimes the Constitution has to take a back seat, or, well, the Constitution is not a suicide pact. When he says stuff like that, it's like, he's not remembering that he's not going to be around after 2028. We could have a left-wing Democrat president in there. And if you say, well, it's okay when our guy does it, it's not okay when your guy does it. Look at redistricting. Okay, the Democrats have, made districts that look like a squished salamander, or, it looks like a snake eating an apple out of a tree. And then when they go to make the districts more favorable to the Republicans in Texas, everybody freaks out. And the legislators from Texas run to New York, New Jersey, Illinois, California, or whatever. And those places have already done the gerrymandering much worse than Texas. Even Massachusetts, home of Elizabeth Warren, Liawatha, or Pocahontas, whatever you want to call her. I don't think there are any Republican House seats in Massachusetts, even though they might have 30% Republican voters. So, people need to, when they live in glass houses, they shouldn't throw stones. In my view, legislative districts should be drawn to be as compact and contiguous as possible. They should not be drawn around racial lines, because no matter what color you are, you don't have the right to be represented by somebody who's your same skin color or your same gender. This stuff that, well, black people should only be represented by black politicians. Well, that's wrong. And if you look at, there's a guy in Texas, I can't think of his name. There's a congressman named Byron Donalds in Florida. Both of them are black men, and they represent districts that are like 70% white. And they were elected by their voters because of their stance on the issues and their character, not for any other reason. Um, and then got some dust on here. My district, my state legislative district, is represented by a woman who's like, shoot, she's probably to the left of Joseph Stalin. Okay, and she's a white woman, but I'm white, but that doesn't mean she represents me at all, because she doesn't. Not at all. I got gerrymandered into her district. The line almost goes around my neighborhood. She represents a city and a county well to the west of me. I should actually be in a district with other people in my county. I have more in common with other people in my county, black, brown, yellow, white, red, or whatnot, than I do with white leftists who live, well to the west of me. It just doesn't make any sense. But nevertheless, I'm not going to go off on a tangent on that. I already did that enough. But this thing with DC, we need to be really, really careful about it. Regarding DC, I hear people talking about how they should be a state and have 2 senators. Well, they're a federal district, so that would be a huge conflict of interest. You would also have 2 senators representing about 500,000 people. That's talk about bang for the buck. Jeez. But if you really want to make DC a state, all they need to do is take the part of DC, which is almost all of it north of the Potomac River, and give it to Maryland. That way they already have 2 senators, both already Democrats, and they would have a Democrat House member from Maryland. I think that's Jamie Raskin's district, but I'm not sure. But that, if you really wanted to give them federal representation, that would be the way to do it. Take the non-federal parts of DC and do that. But making them a state is an absolute no-go. That's not going to work. Plus, we'd all have to buy new flags. But anyway, just if you're in favor, if you're on the Trump train and you're blowing the horn and you're shoveling coal into the locomotive, just remember that you do this, and it's going to be like crossing a boomerang with a rattlesnake. It's going to come back around to bite you in the future. Once you let that genie out of the bottle, it doesn't go back in. So I would admonish some of my Trump support friends to be very careful about that. But that's about all I wanted to say on that. And I wish everybody a good Tuesday. It's kind of gloomy here today, but it's supposed to be hot. Trying to decide whether I need to cut the grass today or put it off till tomorrow. But anyway, peace, love, and magic for everybody out there.